Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Ushanka Show, stories about life in the Soviet Union. Здравствуйте, шановні друзі, це програма Ushanka Show. Slava Ukraini. Back in July of this year, I made a video about resurgence of Ukrainian nationalism in Soviet Ukraine, and if by any chance you missed that video, a link will be below in the comments section, and today's video will be the part 2. And I got the feeling that YouTube once again will block monetization for this video just like it did for my first Ukrainian nationalist video. So if you think those videos are important, you can always support my work with super thanks. That's the little heart with the dollar sign below. Thank you so much. And before we begin, I would like also to address this comment, Banderite bullshit. If you're not familiar what Banderite is, it's the English translation of the word Banderovets. So that's the follower of Stepan Bandera, or automatically any Ukrainian nationalist or person that supports independence of Ukraine is being called as a Banderovets, or the follower of Stepan Bandera, by used to be Soviet propaganda and now Russian propaganda. And this comment is a classic example of KISS concept, keep it simple, stupid. Computer programists use that, and propaganda people use it as well, because propaganda, to think about it, is programming human brains. So in order to keep our anti-Ukrainian propaganda simple, let's just call every Ukrainian nationalist as Banderovets. But in reality, there were three major forces in Ukrainian nationalist movement. First of all, we had Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, OUN. And in February of 1940, there was a major split. Younger, more militant youth went with Stepan Bandera, who were willing to fight anyone who occupied Ukrainian territory. So it doesn't matter if you're Polish, German, or Soviet, they were willing to fight you. So that's Banderovцы. And the rest of OUN, so that's older Ukrainian intelligentsia people, went with Andrei Melnik, who was looking at the situations like enemy of my enemy is my friend. So they the ones who cooperated with Germans, trying to set up Ukrainian state with German help. And that 1940 split created a major problem in Ukrainian nationalist movement, because while Melnikovцы were trying to cooperate with Germans when the Germans attacked Soviet Union in 1941, Banderovцы from the get-go were fighting Germans as well and killing them, so that created a lot of tensions between two fractions. And then there was a third part of Ukrainian nationalist movement. It was so-called Ukrainska Povstanchivska Armia, Ukrainian Rebels Army, under Taras Bulba-Borovets. That guy refused to join either Banderovцы or Melnikovцы, so he was fighting on his own. So that was actually military organization, partisans, if you will, and they were hiding in the forests and they were fighting anyone who was against Ukrainian independence. And now going back to the modern days, well, into 1990s, so Ukraine became independent in 1991 without any war, any military fight, just peacefully transferred from being a Soviet republic to independent state. So you could say that Melnikovцы won. So calling anyone who supported Ukrainian independence in 1990s to call them Banderovцы is plain wrong, because it happened peaceful way. So everyone should be called Melnikovцы. Once again, this story is my personal recollection of the events that were going on in Ukraine back in the late 80s, early 90s. So that's Mikhail Gorbachev era and his perestroika movement. And I guess I need to remind you that I was born in 1971, so my generation was pretty much the last Soviet generation, and I already made a video on this topic. Link also will be in the comments section. So kids born in 1970 and 1971 went through the whole Soviet experience, childcare, kindergartens, schools, and then military or colleges. And we also had a chance to participate in the last Soviet-era elections back in 1990. And I'm talking about the parliament elections in Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic in March of 1990. Simultaneously, there were similar elections going on in Belarusian Soviet Republic as well as the Russian Soviet Federation. So everything was happening in March of 1990. And I guess I could say I got lucky, because when I became eligible to be a voter, election of 1990 was the first relatively free elections in the Soviet Union, because the laws were changed in October of 1989 thanks to Mikhail Gorbachev perestroika and his new law on elections, because it included provisions for direct elections of individuals instead of previous group representation of civic organizations when the factory or some other organization will promote a candidate backed by the Communist Party. So we could vote pretty much for anybody, and there were other candidates that the members of the Communist Party. So those were extremely exciting times. And I know I still owe you guys a video about the election in the Soviet Union, but it's really nothing to tell about it. It was a single candidate election, so it wasn't really voting. You just go to put the check mark in order to get some goods that they would sell right there at the election office. So they have a booth here that you drop your yes vote for a single candidate, then you can buy some buckwheat or some other deficit items right next to it. And despite the fact that the Communist Party of Ukraine still hold immense power, they control mass media, they had money, they had the means to advertise their candidates, still out of 450 seats in Ukrainian parliament, so-called Rada, they got only 331 seats, still the majority, but the rest was so-called Democratic Bloc, which obtained 111 seats. So you can imagine what kind of nationalist movement, how powerful it was in Ukraine, that the very first time that the Communist Party lost the monopoly, they lost 30% of the seats in the parliament. Then we had something else which was extremely wild and never seen before in the Soviet Union and the Soviet Ukraine. So we had Communist Party of Ukraine, which they called themselves Group for a Soviet Sovereign Ukraine, 239 members. Then they had People's Movement of Ukraine, 125 members. Then they had Party of Democratic Revival of Ukraine, 41 members. Democratic Party of Ukraine, 19 members. Ukrainian Republican Party, 12 members. And then some unaffiliated members. So we already had factions in the parliament. So that was wild and that was exciting. As a person who grew up in the Soviet Union, I can tell you that sessions of the Soviet parliament were extremely boring and no one really wanted to follow it. You know, a person will go up and read prepared approved statement, then everyone will clap, or if there will be Brezhnev reading his extended statement, people will stand up and have extended clapping. That was standard phrase on the Soviet media. Продолжительные аплодисменты. So that's when people clap for a minute or two. But otherwise, it was extremely boring. While the Ukrainian parliament of 1990 was a totally different animal, now we had fractions, now we had arguments, and it was transmitted live on the radio. I'm not sure about TV, maybe even on TV, but definitely on the radio, because in the summer I was in the village in northern Ukraine and I carried a radio receiver with me everywhere I went to play with my friends, and we listened to the sessions, and it was like so cool. And here's my diary entry from July 20th, 1990, and it just says the weather was pretty bad. 11 o'clock I went to visit my friends, they were still asleep, and I was reading a book. Then when the rain stopped, we went to the forest where we were building like a sand castles. And while we were going back and forth, we were listening to the session of Ukrainian parliament, and it says, Getmanu Polubotku Slava. So that was this rumor. I need to make a separate video on this topic. So there was the Ukrainian Getman, so it's like a military leader, last name Polubotak, and he deposited a lot of gold in the Bank of England like 300 years ago. So the conversation was that now with interest of 8%, there was so much gold that England's supposed to give back to Ukraine that every Ukrainian citizen should get 32 kilograms of gold. So instantly everyone will become a millionaire. That's an interesting topic to research, but that's what was going on. They even talked about Getman Polubotak on that Ukrainian sessions. And you see even like teenagers like us were listening to those sessions. So despite the fact that the majority in parliament were Ukrainian communists, 239 of them, still it was extremely exciting to listen to the meetings, and the first meeting of the parliament took place on May 15, 1990. And since the communists held the majority, no surprise that they elected as the chairman of Verkhovna Rada, Ukrainian parliament, Volodymyr Ivashko, who at that time was the first secretary of the Communist Party of Ukraine. So once again, communists held the power in Ukraine in 1990, 1991, and they elected their main guy as the chairman of the Ukrainian parliament. And the story of Volodymyr Ivashko is both sad and pathetic because he made a really bad, horrible choice in the summer of 1990 when he received a phone call from Mikhail Gorbachev. I'm not sure why Mikhail Gorbachev trusted Volodymyr Ivashko so much, but he offered him the position of Deputy General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. So here, Ivashko had a choice: or remain in Ukraine and be a chairman of the Ukrainian parliament, or go to Moscow. And guess what? He decided to go to Moscow. If he would remain in Kiev as a chairman of Ukrainian parliament, eventually he would become the president of Ukraine, and that's how he will be remembered in the history books, as the very first president of independent Ukraine. But instead, he went to Moscow. He was the second guy after Mikhail Gorbachev. He actually served for an extremely short period of time as a general secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Let's see, for 5 days in August of 1991 during a coup, and that's it, then he disappeared from radar. So when Volodymyr Ivashko resigned as the chairman of Ukrainian parliament and left Kiev from Moscow, that was a huge blow to Ukrainian communists, because it was so embarrassing. Your main guy that you elected as a chairman just resigned because he preferred Moscow and being second after Gorbachev over to Ukraine. So there was a lot of anger and resentment in that time in Ukraine. And guess who was elected as the next chairman of the Ukrainian parliament? Another top communist from Ukrainian Communist Party. This time was Leonid Kravchuk, who later did become the first president of Ukraine. Obviously, a lot of people in Ukraine got extremely angry when one communist got replaced with another communist. And actually, I was a part of the demonstration downtown Kyiv. At that time, I was in college, so that was fall of 1990. And I remember we were marching and yelling, "Кравчучок, Кравчучок, пташечка, політай до Москви, як Івашечка." So it doesn't translate as a rhyme, but it was a Kravchuk, little birdie, fly away to Moscow just like Ivashko did. But even before Volodymyr Ivashko resigned and he was still the chairman of Ukrainian parliament, on July 16, 1990, the parliament accepted declaration of the state sovereignty of Ukraine. 355 yes, 4 no's. So communists of Ukraine voted for Ukraine to be sovereign state, not independent, sovereign state. I guess there's a difference between being independent state or sovereign state. And the main fight was that communists wanted Ukraine still be called Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. So that was the main argument. So July 16 was supposed to become like a national holiday, since that was the day when the Declaration of Sovereignty was signed. But then a year later, on August 24th, 1991, that's when there was a Act of Independence of Ukraine signed, and that became new Ukrainian holiday. Independence Day now is on August 24th, not July 16th. And this poster kind of reflects the mood of the people in Ukraine back then in 1990. So it shows the map of Ukraine and the date, July 16, and it says, "We are for the strong, sovereign country or state of Ukraine in the constellation of brotherly states." So that was the general concept, that we're still part of kind of Soviet Union, but we are more sovereign now. But there was no conversation about dismantling Soviet Union and Ukraine being independent. That happened a year later. And another topic we need to discuss will be, of course, famous or ill-famous referendum that happened in the Soviet Union in March of 1991. So here, this is what we had to fill in Ukraine. It says, do you agree that Ukraine should be a part of the Union of the Soviet Sovereign States according to Declaration of the State Sovereignty of Ukraine? So there's no question, do you want to be as a part of the Soviet Union? It's a question, do you think Ukraine should be a part of the Union of the Soviet Sovereign States? So when people tell you that, hey, 70-some% of Soviet citizens voted for this to remain in the Soviet Union, this is not correct. It was not a question about USSR as it used to be. Now it should be a different union, and every republic now is a sovereign state according to their declaration. And of course, you need to remember that that referendum didn't cover the entire Soviet Union. All three Baltic states refused to be part of it, so minus Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, minus Georgia, minus Armenia, and minus Moldova. So you have 6 republics that refused to participate. And then in Ukraine, 70% voted yes, but once again, not for the USSR, but for the new USSR, and against 28%. And that was the highest no percentage among all the republics. In Russia, no was 26%, and Belarus, 16%, and the rest between 1.7 to 5.8%. So Asian republics were more for the Soviet Union. The highest no was in Ukraine. Second highest no was in Russia. And of course, we also need to mention 1991 Ukrainian independence referendum that occurred on December 1st, 1991. And at that time, 92% of voters approved Declaration of Independence, which was made by Verkhovna Rada, Ukrainian parliament, on August 24th, 1991. So that's impressive there. So quite a change from just a year prior. 72% of Ukrainians said, yes, we want to stay in the new form of the Soviet Union. And just, as I said, a year later, we got 92% said, yes, we want Ukraine to be independent. And I need to mention that even in Crimea, 54% of the voters said yes for Ukrainian independence, and in Sevastopol, 57%. So the Ukrainian independence referendum occurred on December 1st, 1991, and just 25 days later, on December 26, 1991, the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republic, known as USSR or SSSR, we say in Russian, was formally dissolved as a sovereign state. And the signatures below the document about dissolution were signatures of 3 top communists: Yeltsin from Russia, Kravchuk from Ukraine, and Shushkevich from Belarus. And before we wrap up this video, I want to show you a couple of brochures. So this is for the referendum of the December 1st. It says, citizens of Ukraine, when they tell us that Ukraine won't survive without the Soviet Union, please read the following data and make your decision yourself. So every year Ukraine produces so much wheat. So that's a kilograms. So 1 ton of wheat we produce per person, but we consume only 140. Meat, we produce 86, consume 68, sugar 118, and we consume 49.7 kilograms. Where the rest goes. So it kind of shows that Ukraine could be doing well, being an independent state, and following the statistics about how much coal Ukraine produced comparing with other European countries like Spain, France, Germany, Great Britain. So we're in the first place by coal, first place in iron ore, first place steel making, third place in meat production, second place milk production, second place butter production, and first place sugar production. So this the data was telling us, hey, look, Ukraine can do great without being inside of the Soviet Union, so you need to vote yes for the independence of Ukraine. And this interesting flyer came from Donbas region. So once again, December 1st, do you support independence of Ukraine? Donbas said in big giant letters, нет, no. So no to ambitions of the Kiev party apparatchiks, no for destroying the economy, no to civil war, no to fights between the nations, no for restoring Banderovщина. So here you go, they're talking Banderovщina already, Bandera fans, and no to nationalism. So this was printed by Interdvижение Donbassa. So it's like International Movement of Donbass. And quick summary of what I told you about this wave of Ukrainian independence movement. It was controlled really well by the communists. When the first real election happened in Ukraine, communists successfully took the majority. They had 239 seats. They voted, almost all of them, for the declaration of the state sovereignty of Ukraine. Once again, 355 votes yes, 4 no's. A year later, they voted again for the independence of Ukraine. The first chairman of Ukrainian parliament was top communist who made a mistake living for Moscow. Second chairman was again top communist Leonid Kravchuk, who became the first president of Ukraine. So all this process was not a CIA-sponsored coup. It was communists successfully controlling the wave energy of the people, their drive to be independent. They managed to change their colors like chameleons, and from red and blue, they successfully changed to blue and yellow and still stayed on the top, stayed at power, and then they successfully destroyed the economy, robbed the country, led oligarchs to take over the important industries, and it went downhill from there. Okay, my friends, I think we're finally done with this conversation about Ukrainian nationalism. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please don't forget to like it. You can write a comment. You can support my work with super thanks. That's the little heart with the $ below the video. Once again, I don't think YouTube will let me to monetize this video. You always can support my work with your membership on YouTube or Patreon. Otherwise, we'll talk to you soon. До побачення. Goodbye.